I actually wanted to read a little bit more of Frederick Douglass, the life of Frederick Douglass, his autobiography. It's page 34 on this iBiblio.org ebooks PDF. It's on, let's see, it's page 35 to 34. It's chapter 7. Okay. So chapter 7, the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. In the same book, I met with one of Sheridan's mighty speeches on in behalf of Catholic emancipation. These were choice documents to me. I read them over and over again with unabated interest. They gave tongue to interesting thoughts of my own soul, which had frequently flashed through my mind and died away for want of utterance. The moral which I gained from the dialogue was the power of truth over the conscience of even a slave holder. So what we're going to see happen here is we're going to see that the warning that Mr. and Mrs. Auld had given to Frederick Douglass, that you don't want to educate a slave because they won't be happy with their station in life, we're going to see how true that actually is. Okay, so what I got from Sheridan was a bold denunciation of slavery and a powerful vindication of human rights. The reading of these documents enabled me to utter my thoughts and to meet the arguments brought forward to sustain slavery. But while they relieved me of one difficulty, they brought on another even more painful than the one of which I was relieved. The more I read, the more I was led to abhor and detest my enslavers. I could regard them in no other light than a band of successful robbers who had left their homes and gone to Africa and stolen us from our homes, and in a strange land reduced us to slavery. I loathed them as being the meanest as well as the most wicked of men. As I read and contemplated the subject, behold, that very discontentment which Master Hugh had predicted would follow my learning to read had already come to torment and sting my soul to unutterable anguish. So he's not happy with his station in life, right? He's starting to get educated, and which, that makes sense. If someone is ignorant and they're being put in a certain place and they don't know any better, and all attempts are made to make sure that they don't know any better, a good justification for public school is that our children, our village's children, will be smarter than parents. But some parents have such a Nazi-like Hitler-esque impulse that they want to homeschool their child and control their friends, control the flow of any type of conversation, all that they do, anywhere they go, anything that they, any place they look at, I guess every thought that they think. Like a totalitarian control over their entire person. So, this reminds me of that situation. So that is slavery, totalitarian. It's all, do as I say. And it's hopefully, to make the individual a super individual, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. But you could also get a, just a tyrant who just wants a little personal slave to go do their bidding. So the more I read, the more I was led to abhor and detest my enslavers. I could regard them in no other light than a band of successful robbers who had left their homes, gone to Africa, and stolen us from our homes, and in a strange land reduced us to slavery. I loathed them as the meanest as well as the most wicked of men. As I read and contemplated the subject, behold, the very discontentment which Master Hugh had predicted would come. It would follow my learning to read. It had already come to torment and sting my soul to unutterable anguish. As I writhed under it, I would at times feel that learning to read had been a curse rather than a blessing. It had given me a view of my wretched condition without the remedy. It opened my eyes to the horrible pit, but to no ladder upon which to get out. In moments of agony, I envied my fellow slaves for their stupidity. I often wished myself a beast. I preferred the condition of the meanest reptile to my own. Anything, no matter what, to give it a thinking. It was this everlasting thinking of my condition that tormented me. There was no getting rid of it. It pressed upon me by every object within sight or hearing, animate or inanimate. The silver trump of freedom had roused my soul to eternal wakefulness. Freedom now appeared to disappear no more forever. It was heard in every sound and seen in everything. It was ever present to torment me with a sense of my wretched condition. I saw nothing without seeing it. I heard nothing without hearing it. I felt nothing without feeling it. It looked from every star, it smiled, in every calm breath breathed in every wind, and moved in every storm. I often found myself regretting my own existence and wishing myself dead. And but for the hope of being free, I have no doubt but that I should have killed myself or done something for which I should have been killed. So he's getting all suicidal because you're nobody. You're being treated like you're nobody. You're getting all suicidal because you internalize the master's idea of who you are in the world. One part I want to go back, and he says something about how getting educated tormented me because he read this pamphlet which shows how horrid, that slavery was wrong, and how the slave eventually wins his freedom because he had a better argument than the slave master, some Catholic pamphlet. So, good for the Catholics that they was reaching out to the slaves like that. You had, he says, it given him a new view of his wretched condition without the remedy. So his soul was tormented, and he really felt bad about, who he was and his position in life. But he had no solution. He didn't know how to get out of it. And that has to be pretty torturous. Paulo Freire says the oppressed has to think of their situation as a limiting experience that they can escape. So it has to be something that they can do. And Frederick Douglass is being faced, and he has no mirror for his time. He's one of a kind. He's being faced with the notion that he hates his place in this world. So he knows better, and he knows what's going on without the ability or having any idea of what he needs to do. No inclination of what he needs to do in order to be free. Okay, so while in this state of mind, his suicidal state of mind, I was eager to hear anyone speak of slavery. I was a ready listener. Every little while I could hear something about the abolitionists. It was sometime before I found out what the word meant. It was always used in such connections as to make it an interesting word to me. If a slave ran away and succeeded in getting clear, or if a slave killed his master, set fire to a barn, or did anything very wrong in the mind of a slaveholder, it was spoken of as the fruit of abolition. Hearing the word in this connection very often, I set about learning what it meant. The dictionary afforded me little or no help. I found it was the act of abolishing. But then I did not know what was to be abolished. Here I was perplexed. I did not dare to ask anyone about its meaning, for I was satisfied that it was something they wanted me to know very little about. After a patient waiting, I got one of our city papers containing an account of the number of petitions from the North praying for the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia and of the slave trade between the states. From this time I understood the words abolition and abolitionist, and always drew near when the word was spoken, expecting to hear something of importance to myself and fellow slaves. The light broke in upon me by degrees. I went one day down on the wharf of Mr. Waters, seeing two Irishmen unloading a scow of stone. I went unasked and helped them. When we had finished, one of them came to me and asked if I were a slave. I told him I was. He asked, "Are you a slave for life?" I told him that I was. The good Irishman seemed deeply affected by the statement. He said to the other that it was a pity so fine a little fellow as myself should be a slave for life. He said it was a shame to hold me. They both advised me to run away to the North, that I should find friends there, and that I should be free. I pretended not to be interested in what they said, and treated them as if I did not understand them, for I feared they might be treacherous. White men had been known to encourage slaves to escape, and then, to get the reward, catch them and return them to the masters. I was afraid that these seemingly good men might use me so, but I nevertheless remembered their advice, and from that time I resolved to run away. I looked forward. So Irishmen can relate to slaves, and they said, "You should run away, be free." I was too young to think of doing so immediately. Besides, I wished to learn how to write, as I might have occasion to write my own past. I consoled myself with the hope that I should one day find a good chance. Meanwhile, I would learn to write. The idea as to how I might learn to write was suggested to me by being in Durgin and Bailey's shipyard, and frequently seeing the ship carpenters, after hewing and getting a piece of timber ready to use, write on the timber the name of that part of the ship for which it was intended. When a piece of timber was intended for the larboard side, it would be marked thus, L. When a piece was for the starboard side, it would be marked thus, S. A piece for the larboard Side forward would be marked LF. Okay. I immediately commenced copying them. In a short time, I was able to make the 4 letters named. After that, when I met with any boy who I knew could write, I would tell them I could write as well as he. The next word would be, I don't believe you, let me see you try it. I would then make the letters, which I'd been so fortunate as to learn, and ask him to beat that. In this way, I got a good many lessons in writing, which it is quite possible I should never have gotten in any other way. During this time, my copybook was the board fence, brick wall, and pavement. My pen and ink was a lump of chalk. With these, I learned mainly how to write. I then commenced a continued copying the italics in Webster's spelling book until I could make them all without looking on the book. By this time, my little Master Thomas had gone to school and learned how to write, and had written over a number of copybooks. These had been brought home and shown to some of our near neighbors and then laid aside. My mistress used to go to the class meeting at the Wilkes Street meeting house every Monday afternoon and leave me to take care of the house. When left thus, I used to spend the time in writing in the spaces left in Master Thomas's copybook, copying what he had written. I continued to do this until I could write a hand very similar to that of Master Thomas. Thus, after a long, tedious effort for years, I finally succeeded in learning how to write. Chapter 8. Oh, I'm just kind of reading now because I want to see, it's interesting to me how that time was, what the ideas of Frederick Douglass, what he was talking about. And, I got 4 more minutes. Let's see, autobiography. I also like bringing Frederick Douglass back to life. By reading, classic authors and I don't really put much of a spin on it. Some emphasis. I like saying Edward fucking Covey because, fuck Edward Covey. Seriously, that is some bullshit. Edward Covey was a slave breaker, and he was, I guess in a way, he's like, in the Bible against Jesus, he's like, who's the guy that turned on Jesus? Judas. So he's a good foil to Frederick Douglass because Edward fucking Covey was just a shitty fucking human being, and he was pure evil, just fucking wretched, just could fucking hit somebody over and over and over again and break them like a dog or an ox. They're wild and free, and so you got to get them to where they just listen to whatever you say. So you just got to beat them up and beat them up and beat them up until they understand that if if the animal or person doesn't do as the master says, and it's going to get more violent. So it's just easier to just do as they say, which actually is wrong if you know any B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner says that's reinforcement of a negative kind. If you allow people to do mean things to you and that influences you, or you submit to that type of behavior, then you are actually reinforcing those tactics of control. So yeah, fuck Edward fucking Covey. Also fuck Mr. and Mrs. Auld. Mr. and Mrs. Auld, Mr. Auld, they're both shitty fucking people. Fuck both of these fucking Ma and Pa Auld. They're fucking dicks. The Ma, the mistress, and Mrs. Auld was try to be good, try to teach, Mr. Douglass his ABCs, taught his ABCs, and then stopped teaching him anything else. So she had give him, the inch, and he was going to take it an L, but that's where his education, his desire to educate himself came from, because they said you can't teach a slave, nigger is what they said, you can't teach a nigger to read and write because they will not be happy with their station in life. So from that moment, that's when he says, education, reading and writing, that's going to be my pathway to freedom. That's how I'm going to get out of this shithole. And actually I've known Ben Franklin, Abraham Lincoln, a lot of these sort of self-educated men did exactly that. Educated themselves, read voraciously and wrote voraciously, and through the reading and writing, that interaction was able to come up with a lot of distinctions and well thought out ideals. So I got another minute here. In a very short time, I went to live at Baltimore. My old master's youngest son, Richard, died, and in about 3 years and 6 months After his death, my old master, Captain Anthony, died, leaving only his son Andrew and a daughter Lucretia to share his estate. He died while on a visit to see his daughter in Hillsborough. Cut off thus unexpectedly, he left no will as to the disposal of his property. It was therefore necessary to have a valuation of the property, that it might be equally divided between Mrs. Lucretia and Master Andrew. I was immediately sent for to be valued with the other property. Here again my feelings rose up in detestation of slavery. I had now a new conception of my degraded position, of my degraded condition. Prior to this, I had become, if not insensible to my lot, at least partly so. I left Baltimore with a young heart overborne with sadness and a soul full of apprehension.